Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I take TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I love where we start off. It's like, obviously, this is, post-crisis. We've finally got the post-crisis for everything now, so I appreciate us rounding this out with The Flash, which in the grand scheme of things, it makes the most sense, especially for The Flash to be the last one, too, because it is the one that has always had the bigger connection to the multiverse, but I love it. It starts off with jitters. It's like, oh, we just reopened. I hope you like the new store. They get robbed, and it's like, open the cash register. It's like, we literally don't have anything in the cash register. We just opened. And he's like, oh, really? And it's like, yeah. He's like, well, I'm going to start shooting in here. And then luckily Barry shows up in time. He's like, oh, sorry. And he takes care of things. And he's like, oh, sorry, I'm so late. Oh, the place is great. It's like, everyone clapping up. There's, oh, no, stop. It's good. It's fine. So that's all interesting. Like I said, there's a lot of things to kind of break down. First and foremost, let's go about Cisco's little breakdown, his literal breakdown, because he's like about the craziness that is crisis, post-crisis now. It's like, I wish I wanted to take time, but it's like I couldn't read everything. But obviously, like, Cisco had made a timeline of everything because he's trying to figure out, okay, so what's changed and what hasn't? Because, Superman and obviously Kara are on this Earth, so is Black Lightning. It's like they've basically been here the entire time when in fact they haven't. So that's a whole thing, within itself that Cisco is trying to process. But like all their entire lives, it's like the fact of the matter is Killer, well, for all, she's the only one that's like nonchalant about it. Like, shouldn't we just be okay with it? But for him, it's like, no, because there's so many villains. None of our doppelgangers made it to this world, but who knows like what villains found their way onto it, which is a complicated thing considering there's so many doppelgangers running around that at least they're not aware of. Because obviously there's Beth, in Gotham, and then there were all those different brainings from the different Earths and stuff like that. So obviously still trailing over the remnants of some people tagging along, and then some people just naturally finding their way to this Earth and everything. And I even love Cisco opening up his shirt, which at the time I didn't think about it, but just him opening his shirt the way it's like, oh, very Superman, like, lo and behold, he's wearing a Superman shirt. It's like, I love that, just like having so much fun with that whole situation. But along with all that, Diggle obviously shows up because he wants to drop off something for Barry, something Oliver left him, and it was the mask that Barry brought him. I was like, holy smokes. Well, that's obviously funny, because, Felicity's last name being Smoke. Didn't plan that. That just came out like that. The fact of the matter is it came back full circle like that. It's like, holy crap, because Barry made that back for Oliver back in season 2. But nevertheless, it's like, because remember, before that, Oliver would just paint the mask on his face, like covering like his eyes with green paint. But nevertheless, it's crazy to think like, oh, that's come back to Barry. But Barry's like, oh, it must be some message or something. Side note, I don't know if they brought this up during Arrow that Diggle and Lila are moving to Metropolis. I feel like I don't remember. I feel like I would have made more of a point that they said that, but it's like, oh no, we're moving to Metropolis. Obviously, we do know because it's like, oh, I should be back home packing up stuff, but he hasn't. So it's like, oh, so this is before the very final scene of Arrow where like the Green Lantern stuff gets hinted at. So it's like, okay, so like that hasn't happened yet. That's gonna happen after his visit with Barry. But obviously, Barry's looking into this mask because he thinks there's a bigger message here. Like, why would Oliver send it to him? And so he reads Mirakuru on it. It's like, oh, so maybe there's potentially Mirakuru out there. Like, we don't want this to land in anyone's hand. I even love seeing Barry zipping back and forth. You have Diggle being like, could you slow down? Because it was making him motion sick. Just looking at it, he's like, Diggle, you don't want me to flash you over there, so I'm bringing the entire lab here. So it's like, all right, so what we're going to do is let's go, so that, obviously the traces that are on the mask lead to Lian Yu, like I said, the whole Mirakuru thing. So it's like, all right, let's go investigate. Diggle downs a whole bunch of pills. Barry's like, oh, that's too much. He's like, are you ready? And Diggle's like, what you got? And they race off to Lian Yu. And it's kind of sticking on that point. I like the whole thing of like, it turns out it ends up being nothing. There's nothing left. And it's like, oh, what? And so Barry starts thinking like conspiracies and stuff like that. Like, well, this doesn't make any sense. But there is that one moment I thought was interesting. Is the fact this Barry kind of like, he was kind of getting agitated and then his powers start reflecting it. And like, he was like, whoa. He's like, I've never had that happen before. But it was like, for him, he was getting frustrated because Diggle's telling him like, because what it most likely was a byproduct of, obviously the last time Oliver had any contact with Mirakuru, it was him and Thea had crossed paths with Slade the last time they were on Lian Yu at that time, because that was a couple years ago. Obviously, that was like, what, season? Might have been 3? It might have been 4, I don't remember. I think it was 3. But nevertheless, like I said, I'm going on a tangent and all that. But obviously, because of that, Barry's just kind of like, oh, like much like Diggle. Diggle just kept thinking like, oh, Oliver's mission isn't over. The fact of the matter is, you know, he needed to do something. Much like Barry, he needed to do something because he's failed because by accepting like, oh, the mission is over, it means kind of letting Oliver go. That accepting the fact is that Oliver's gone, but it's like as long as there was a mission, there was a way of keeping him alive. So obviously, Diggle's kind of been dealing with that himself. So I think after everything, you know, like I said, it's not everything from the series finale of Arrow, but it's a good chunk of it after all of that, because obviously this is most likely after Oliver's funeral and stuff like that, but like not to like the telltale end where we got to see where everything and everyone ends up. But the fact of the matter is, for him, it's like, you know, that Barry needs to kind of slow down, because life isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Because Oliver was always so focused on the next mission, and it wasn't till too late when it's just kind of like, no, there are things more important to the mission than the mission, and he doesn't want Barry to lose sight of that, which Barry kind of has, because he's been so desperate. Like, Oliver made this world, and like the fact is, I have to protect it, I have to fight, you know, and he was kind of getting swept up in that. But it's like, live your life. You know, because the fact of the matter is, if anything, and that's something that's resounded across all of this, it's like, you never know how long you have. So you have to kind of enjoy your life while you have it, you know, because life is so precious, and it could be here 1 minute and gone the next. So I just thought that was kind of a neat moment that, you know, for Diggle and Barry to end up having. And I thought that was, you know, pretty neat. And it's interesting considering, you know, Barry is that person. Like, you know, Barry's been running his entire life. He's always told to run. And so for him to be told to kind of slow down now, and that's very reflective of what's going on with Iris's story, because in Iris's story, there's the whole situation of, obviously, she's looking into this group. She has a source that ended up telling her more about this organization she's hunting called Black Hole, and they're connected to this company called McCulloch Technologies, which is interesting. The head of it, that dude, I know him from, like, the best thing I know him from is Jeepers Creepers 2. He was kind of like the biggest, like, jock douchebag. I forgot his character's name, because it was like, that was well over a decade ago. God, that movie came out like 2003, I think, if I remember correctly. Jesus, but like that's the thing I kind of like best know him from. I've seen him pop up in other stuff, but that's kind of like the forefront of my mind. But I'm like, oh, that's so, you know, interesting. Side note, I should go ahead and mention this while I'm thinking about it. I didn't realize the actor who plays Zaz in Gotham played a villain in the Arrowverse. His name was amongst the cards, because there's literally a binder of all, what was it, Cisco's Who's of Who's or something like that, because basically it was like him registering all the different metahumans and stuff like that. And apparently that dude's character in this is the Mist. Like, I don't remember. I feel like I might remember, but at the same time I don't. I didn't realize that until I saw that picture. I was like, oh, which once again is kind of an interesting thing, like to learn like how much the Flash has changed because of post-crisis. But like I said, we'll get to that soon enough. But kind of circling back, obviously, you know, Iris is very, you know, invested in this organization, because for her it's like, all right, this is a big story, that this was all happening while the whole crisis thing, or before the whole crisis thing really went down. So obviously her, Allegra and Camilla are looking into this. Cecila's telling her to kind of take this slow, because it's like, well, this could turn into a legal thing, you getting sued. But Iris confronts the CEO of the place, and the fact of the matter is, you know, he's kind of like, oh yeah, that weapon or whatever, it was stolen from us. It was probably most likely by someone from Obsidian Tech, which I'm like, hey, you get to make those references now because everything's on the same Earth. Hell yeah. But nevertheless, but obviously Iris doesn't buy it, and he's like, oh, you know, this company was my wife's legacy and stuff like that, so out of respect, could you not run your story? She's like, I get it, but the fact of the matter is, people need to know the truth. Like, it might losing your weapon and that, oh, this whole thing might be an embarrassment, so that might be why you're not saying anything, but the fact of the matter is, this needs to be, you know, the truth needs to be told about this. We also got, like, what was her name? Camille, the assassin in this episode. Her, like, that weapon is crazy, like literally disintegrating people into like dust. I was like, oh, that sucks. It was interesting too when they kind of reference her later on, basically making her, comparing her to Dr. Light, which is interesting because like Earth 1 doesn't have a Dr. Light. I know, because the Dr. Light they crossed paths with is from Earth 2. The girl that Barry dated for a little while earlier seasons, she was the Earth 1 doppelganger of Earth 2 Dr. Light. They made a whole point of that with the whole, when they were fighting Zoom and everything back in season 2. So it was a whole thing, but it was like, oh, I feel like I remember there being a reference to Dr. Light in the future, like last season with Nora, but maybe I'm remembering wrong. I don't remember. But nevertheless, like I said, tangents and stuff like that. But it's like, oh, here's a new, more powerful Dr. Light, which makes you wonder. It's like, does Dr. Light still exist in this continuity? Was that something that was kind of wiped, and she kind of represents the newborn Dr. Light? Because like I said, there was no Earth One Dr. Light, so I guess like her appearance in this is because apparently they end up finding out like her powers are similar to Dr. Light's, but she can't really control it. But the weapon she uses basically amplifies and precisely aims her power, so it makes it more like she's able to fire her light like an actual bullet. The weapon is the means, but she is the ammunition essentially. So I thought that was interesting. And obviously, you know, after running the story, said assassin comes after them, almost kills them. Luckily, Cecile was there because I'm sure Cecile was able to feel her murderous intent, and everyone was able to get out. Sadly, Iris's source ends up, what's his name? Hask ends up getting killed. Poor guy. I've seen him in something, but I don't remember what. Isn't he? Could be Travelers. Wasn't he Trevor's dad in Travelers? The Netflix. Well, it was originally on TV in Canada, but obviously, like here in the States, it was a Netflix original. I think that was that same actor. I could be mistaken. I don't remember. Regardless, tangents. That kind of sucks. And especially like when Iris was getting away and then the shards ended up flying and cutting her armor. I was like, oh, is that because I was thinking like, oh, did it kind of spread to her armor? Was it going to spread like an infection? And I was like, no, but like that weapon can do some serious damage, especially when it collects with stuff like the glass. I was like, oh man, that's interesting. And obviously I like I said, like in combination of what Barry was going through this episode, Iris was kind of doing the same thing because it took Joe kind of talking to her to basically, you know, take things slow. It's like, I know you want to take down these bad guys, and I would never tell you to stop doing what you're doing. But the fact of the matter is, you can't expect to do this all in one day. It needs to be a process. Because he talks about, like, the moment you told me crisis was coming, I started doing all these cases because he's like, who knows how long I have left to live, so I need to get as many cases done as possible, try and do as much good as I can before crisis come and I get wiped out. But the fact of the matter is, crisis came and went, and now it's like you kind of have to like readjust, and that's something I thought was kind of a neat moment between Iris and Barry. She ends up talking about the fact is she was so that month period of like, oh, we got to do so much has got to be done like before crisis gets here, and she was in that mode for so long she forgot to kind of take a step back now that crisis was over, because it's like she was so worried because it's like, you know, Barry was going to be going, Barry was going to die. That was always being thrown in her face. But I'm like, now that it's done, Barry's still alive, you know, it's that thing of like taking a deep breath and enjoying life while you have the chance. So, but there's no clear-cut winner in this black hole versus the citizen situation, because it turns into a thing of a bit of a stalemate, because obviously the assassin shows up at Joe's house expecting to kill Iris, but it was Camilla using a fake to kind of lure her in while Iris is confronting the CEO of McCulloch Tech. But sadly, she gets the upper hand and she's up shooting Frost. I was like, oh god, this can't be good. That's not good. But luckily, she was able to kind of freeze the light, I guess, like kind of solidify it more as a bullet and just remove it. And it's like, oh, even the assassin was like, intriguing. I guess next time I have to go for a headshot. But luckily, it's I keep trying to remember his name. I think it was Jonathan, right? He ends up kind of calling off the hit. So for where things currently stand, it's a stalemate. But Iris kind of figures that this wasn't like, oh, like just your weapon was stolen. You literally took the weapon yourself, and you've been orchestrating this whole thing because you are Black Hole. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. Another detail I meant to bring up earlier too was like the whole interesting fact that basically Black Hole has been active since the particle accelerator, which I like stuff like that, where you basically retroactively make it so that all this stuff has secretly been going on the entire time. They just weren't aware of it until now. Because it's like, because Supergirl's kind of going through the same thing with Leviathan. Leviathan's technically been existing the entire time, but it's like now they're being brought to the forefront. It's kind of the same thing as, God, I'm blanking on the example. Oh, right, DeVoe came about because of the particle accelerator, but he didn't really pop up until obviously season 4. So it's just stuff like that where it's like you retroactively make it so this stuff has been bubbling beneath the surface. You just never known it. And they've got all these metahumans on their side. Obviously, what their grand scope is and what their skill is. I mean, obviously, you have assassins for hire. I'm sure it's for your own benefit, but I'm also sure you're probably selling these said metas to people for a good chunk of change of like, oh, don't you want your own specially suited meta assassin, so on and so forth. So that's probably a thing with this. Maybe not, but luckily, like I said, everything kind of ends in a stalemate. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this whole black hole thing progresses. We'll get to that, soon enough, what we got at the end of the episode. But another angle to this whole situation is Cisco getting super pissed at Nash, even locking him away for a little bit. Just like, fine, do whatever you want to. Because, Nash wants to make sure that no one can get access to the anti-universe anymore. Suddenly, like, after hearing, like, oh, everyone was in danger, like, oh, what happened, like, especially when it came to Allegra, I was like, what the hell is that about? I mean, he seemed pretty tight with Allegra before, but it seemed like, why are you so concerned about her now? That was interesting. Which even Cisco's like, oh, you only want her help, you only come around when you want our help for something. And I love it. Cisco blows up at him because it's like, literally everything is your fault. The fact of the matter is, you released the anti-monitor, and for him, it's like, so many universes were wiped out. And that's what I think is kind of neat too. Like, obviously it's like, oh, we're celebrating all this stuff that came to this Earth and everything. Everyone's together. But there's also bad with this too. So many Earths were wiped out. A great example is Earth 2. I think at that time I didn't really process it because it's like, right, Jesse, Harry, like, that was their Earth. Like, the fact of the matter is they had people they cared about on that Earth. And even the multiverse, because it's like, well, what about Earth 19? Because that's where Breacher is from. Gypsy's dad. So it's like, he's going, that's going, especially what he meant to Cisco despite everything. He was still, he's still kind of like family to Cisco. But it's like, I mean, that also begs the question, like, what about Jay Garrick and his wife from Earth 3? Like, what about that? Like, are we going to find out, oh, they exist on this Earth? I doubt it. I think they got wiped out too. So it's like, Cisco's the one that's kind of dealing with the gravitas of like, who knows how many worlds got destroyed and, how many people died because of your actions. Because, yes, we're alive here on this Earth, but the fact of the matter is so many died. So much was lost because of this crisis event. So it's not like everything's all sunshines and rainbows. Like, the fact of the matter is there's some bad that came from this, And then, Caitlin talks to him later on, and what this really stems from is because Cisco blames himself because it's like, if I hadn't given up being Vibe, maybe I could have seen that first wave coming, the one that eventually ended up wiping out Earth 2. It's like, boom, I could have gotten there, maybe saved lives, kind of what happened with Earth 38. They were able to save a whole bunch of people's lives, but, Cisco's blaming himself, but like, Caitlin's asking, well, do you regret taking a metahuman cure? And he's like, no. Do you want to be Vibe again? And I thought that's kind of an interesting thing too. Like, so I guess after maybe it's a scene we never got to see, but I guess when everything got rebooted, Cisco went back to being Cisco before, the monitor had made him Vibe again. So, because, I was about to say, it was, I was wondering if he was going to keep his powers or not. It seems like he doesn't. What's also interesting, too, he also makes a point, because they're like, oh, why don't you use one of those breach things? It's like, because the multiverse doesn't exist anymore, because it's all on just this one Earth, things are kind of unstable, so breaching isn't an option. And even if it did, it's wonky. It doesn't work necessarily the same way it did before. So that's interesting. But that's a lot of weight to kind of carry because it's because Cisco even ends up apologizing later on to Nash because he was lashing out at Nash because he was kind of dealing with his own blame he felt about this whole crisis situation, that he just kind of needed to kind of lash out at someone, and that ended up being Nash. I mean, to be fair, Diggle and John, well, it was John in particular, I think, but I think didn't Diggle kind of lash out at him, but I think it was more so John, because I mean, once again, like crisis, because Nash tried to be like, I try to rectify like my whole thing with the crisis. It's like, yeah, but so many people died, including Oliver. Oliver sacrificed his life to give us this world. And so for Cisco, that's why he's so adamant about, much like Barry and Iris, why he's so adamant about, trying to, prepare for all these threats, because he's like, I wasn't prepared before. Because I wasn't Vibe, it left us wide open and so much destruction happened because of it. So he's retroactively trying to make sure we know all about all these threats, because he doesn't want to get blindsided by the next threat because it was something he wasn't ready for, and it ends up costing a lot of people their lives. But because of this, Caitlin was suggesting, like, why don't you take some time away, gather up all this information. Basically, like, you go out there, figure out who some of these metahumans are, where everything stands. You kind of categorize and catalog them, to kind of figure out some of the big differences since Crisis. Maybe time away from Central City would do you some good. We see Cisco leaving. I'm wondering, is Camilla going to stay? I'm assuming so. They never had a scene showing that she was going to go with him. So, but it's going to be interesting to see, what ends up happening, for Cisco going down at that route. But they're leaving Nash here. And then Nash ends up having this photo of him and Allegra. So I guess, like, I'm assuming she's his daughter on a different Earth. I wonder, is he going to be like all right, and that's also depressing too. We actually think about it, because that means, like, Sherlock, he's going too. Because that was also the thing too that Cisco made reference of. It's like all the Harrys in the universe, and we literally get stuck with the one who basically wiped out the multiverse. So that's kind of interesting when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. But I'm assuming, like, Allegra is his daughter, and I guess, like, whatever happened in his past, because, like, even during Crisis, we still didn't learn too much about Nash. So I guess that's why he kind of latched on to Allegra so much, why he kind of ended up giving her the prep talk. He needed her help, sure, but it also seems like it was also for a greater purpose of, like I said, I think that's his daughter from a different Earth. But now it's like, well, especially if his Earth isn't, well, his Earth was probably already gone to begin with. So now, because, it's like, whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it. Maybe he's actually been going to different Earths trying to find a doppelganger of his daughter, but she's actually been dead on every other Earth he had ever previously visited, type of situation. Maybe not. So there's that side of things, and I'm curious to kind of see where that ends up going. But another angle to this is the very end, where you have Iris piecing together, like, the message from that dude, her informant that had died. Basically, it was about Eva. And then it's like about something about a mirror. It seems like she disappeared, even making it seem like she straight up died. I was kind of implying from her husband, but it's like, what was up? Like, what was she into? Like, what was she up to? The fact is, Iris sneaks into her office, and in front of her there's a mirror. I almost halfway expecting, like, a horror thing of, like, Iris turns around and walks away, but her reflection stays the same. I was kind of expecting something like that, but it didn't happen. But something just as creepy happens when Iris gets grabbed by the mirror and pulled into it. So I'm like, okay, so we're dealing with, like, a mirror dimension, which I feel like, what have I seen that pop up on recently? A whole mirror dimension thing. Right, it reminds me of The Magicians, because they literally have a mirror dimension. Obviously, that's kind of where things kind of went down in Season 4's finale. Well, bits and pieces of Season 4. Regardless, it's a whole thing. But I'm curious to kind of dive into that. Is that supposed to be, like, is that where Eva was? Is that what she was working on? Like, is she, like, she never died, she just disappeared, and her husband, like, I guess that maybe that's the world she, like, maybe she created a portal to another kind of dimension, which is interesting. Which, once again, is kind of a big thing, too, like, what this means going forward. Like I said, it's so interesting because, like, Crisis literally ends with the multiverse expanding again, but it's like, I think, like, and I brought this up, like, afterwards, after it was kind of like, oh, the other Earths don't exist anymore. We're still in the state of this being the only Earth, because that ending to Crisis isn't going to happen until probably the end of each of these show seasons. Like, once these current seasons are over, probably near the end, it's going to be like, boom, 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 all these other worlds are popping up. Because once again, we already know, like, Stargirl, for example, takes place on Earth 2, which begs the question, like, what does that mean? Harry and Jesse are going to be about? There's that whole situation. So just something kind of floating through my mind. So I'm really interested to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.